Strength training is an important part of any athlete's program. And if it's programmed and executed properly, strength training can be a great way to improve your athletic performance, improve your body composition. Unfortunately, many athletes make common mistakes in their strength training and it holds them back and limits their progress. So here I have 3 tips for you that can hopefully help improve your strength training, and if you apply them, I think you'll have a better time when you go to lift weights. So tip number 1 is to pick the right exercises. If we really want to get the most out of our strength training, then we need to pick proper exercises that allow us to move in a way where we're producing force, being aggressive. The main thing to look for are simple and stable exercises, especially for your primary lifting movements. Since the main goal of strength training is to generate force by activating motor units, we need to pick exercises that allow for that to happen. The more simple and stable an exercise is, the easier it's going to be to perform it with high levels of force production. It's also going to make it easier to load and change that load over time. If you have an exercise that is too complex, maybe you're doing a single leg, single arm kettlebell snatch on a Bosu ball, you're not going to be able to produce a lot of force because A, it's a complex movement where you're having to think more about how to get the movement done rather than just thinking about pushing the weight, so you're not able to produce a lot of force because of where your attention is directed. And also, if you have an unstable exercise, anytime your body or your brain senses that it's unstable and does not have a firm standing on the ground, so to speak, then it's going to ramp down your ability to produce force. That's why if you're standing on a Bosu ball, you're barely able to move. Your brain is so focused on balancing that you're not going to be able to do a very explosive, powerful movement. Instead, if we pick exercises where they are very stable, they're very simple, like a squat, a deadlift, a bench press, we're able to really focus on producing high levels of force production. And when we do that, A, we're going to have a lot of neural drive. We're going to be able to use our nervous system, activate motor neurons to activate muscle tissue, and we're going to be able to do that better when we have a simple, stable exercise. It's also safer because you're not risking rolling your ankle or falling over or anything like that. So your brain is not going to sense that it's under threat from a balance perspective, and instead it can just focus on the threat of the load on your back trying to crush you into the ground, and you can put all your efforts into generating a lot of force, putting a lot of tension through muscles, putting a lot of neural activation into muscles, and if we do that, we're going to have our best chance of getting stronger. But if instead all we do is pick highly complex or unstable exercises where we're not able to produce a lot of force, create a lot of neural drive, activate a lot of motor units, and we're not able to have a stable, firm standing on the ground, we're not going to get the most out of our strength training. So it's not that you can never do those exercises. If you have an exercise you want to do and it's not a stable exercise and it's not a simple exercise, maybe it's complex where it's unstable in general, you can still do those exercises, but they need to be accessory movements in your program, not your main lifts that you're using to drive strength. If you're truly wanting to get stronger, then you need to pick stable exercises that you can put a high load on that are going to allow you to be forceful and not risk falling over or having to focus on balancing or anything like that. So for your main strength lifts, think of things like squats, deadlifts, and bench press variations. It doesn't have to be the exact movement, like the back squat doesn't have to be the only squat you do. You could do a box squat, you could do a front squat, you could do a safety bar squat. But you should stick with movements like the squat that are stable and allow you to put a lot of load on the bar. Tip number 2 is you need to progress your training loads. So a common mistake that athletes make when they're trying to get stronger is that they don't progress their training loads. They might, warm up with 135, then they go to 185, then 225, then 275, and they stick with 275 for all their working sets. And then the next time they come in, they do the same thing. Warm up with 135, then 185, and they're doing the same loads every time they train, both their warm-up sets and their top sets. But the problem is, our bodies are really lazy and our bodies do not want to adapt. That's why it's hard to get better at sprinting, it's hard to get stronger, because you're trying to fight your body's inherent laziness that it doesn't want to, dedicate energy to adapting to exercise. It's only going to do that, it's only going to get better, stronger, faster, all that, if your body senses that the training stress that it's dealing with is something more than it's currently capable of handling. So with that in mind, we have to progress our lifting over time. We have to add weight to the bar, add reps to what we're doing. I'm not saying we have to go, one day we're squatting 300 pounds and then the next week we try 500 pounds. And it doesn't mean that we should try to take our 300-pound squat and do it for 3 reps this week and 10 reps next week. But we can push it in smaller ways. Maybe one week you're going at 300 pounds on your squat for 3 reps, and then the next week you try to get 305 for 3 reps. Or the next week you go from 3 reps to 4 reps, and then the following week you might add some weight and go back to 3 reps. But whatever way you go, you're trying to incrementally push up the training load over time to where by the end of multiple training cycles, you've done a lot more volume. One way you can do this is with a daily undulated loading approach. So let's say Monday you're going to squat, Wednesday you're going to squat, and Friday you're going to squat. Monday you might do 4 sets of 3 at 75%. Wednesday you do 5 sets of 2 at 80%. And then Friday you do 5 sets of 5 at 70%. You can also take this approach with your weekly setup. So maybe week 1, if you're deadlifting, week 1 you might do 75 to 80% of your max. Then week 2 you do 77.5 to 85% of your max, and then week 3 for a deload you do 67.5 to 75% of your max. Over time you want to see that you might increase the load for a week or 2, then you drop it back down a little bit to deload. Then you push it back up above what you did those previous weeks a little bit, maybe 5, 10, 20 pounds more than you did in the previous cycle. Then you back it down again for a deload. But over the long term, you should see your training loads going up over time. If you were to take a hypothetical situation where you squatted for 4 sets of 3 times per week, with and without progressing your training, we could look at a simple example of where you're squatting 300 pounds. So if you did not progress your training loads, you'd be performing 3,600 pounds of volume per week, or 10,980 pounds per cycle. But if instead you added 5 pounds each week to your squat, which is not something you would necessarily do, we don't really progress in a linear fashion, but just for the example here, if you did add 5 pounds each week in a linear fashion, your training volume would be 9% higher by the end of 12 weeks, with a higher volume of weight lifted in every training cycle. So if you can increase your training volume over time while maintaining high training intensities, you'll likely get stronger than someone who did not perform as much volume at the same intensities in that period of time. You want to think about adaptations to strength training being a result of the combination of intensity and volume. If all you do is volume, meaning you just do a lot of reps, a lot of lifts, but they're not heavy, well, you're probably not going to get that much stronger. But if all you do is, work up to a 1 rep max, you only hit, 15 reps in the whole workout, well, you're not getting enough of a training volume. You're not getting enough total work done to really stimulate your body to improve. So we want to keep the intensities high, 65 to 85% most of the time, sticking probably within that, probably most of the time is going to be 70 to 80%. We want to keep those intensities high, but we want to incrementally increase those intensities by adding a little weight to the bar. And we want to make sure that by the end of, a 12-week period of training or a year of training or something, that we're doing more volume at those intensities, more total weight lifted than if we were to just stick with the same loading over, each week doing the same thing. If you were to do 4 cycles where you did this example of adding 5 pounds each week, if you didn't change your loading, you'd be at 10,800 pounds pretty much every training cycle. But if over 4 training cycles you were adding 5 pounds each week, and by the end of the 12 weeks, that last training cycle would be at 12,600 pounds of volume. So you'd be looking at over 1,000 pounds more in volume lifted in that cycle. So if you have someone who's lifting 1,000 more pounds of volume within a training cycle than you, they're probably going to get stronger. So obviously we don't want to rush the progression, and you should avoid massive increases in load from session to session or from week to week, but we should aim to safely increase the load and do this consistently over time. And if you consistently add load to your training, you increase the loads you're lifting incrementally in small chunks over time, you will get stronger than someone who doesn't do that. The third and final tip here is going to be that you need to push yourself on your accessory movements or your special exercises. So an accessory movement, you could call it a special exercise, it's basically the same thing, is just a movement that is not your main lift, but you're using it to help drive up your main lifts or using it to target your weaknesses. Often when we think of strength training, we think of the big 3 lifts, squat, bench, deadlift, and athletes can make major gains when they focus on these lifts. And while these are great, eventually your progress is going to stagnate and you'll find it challenging to continue to add load to these exercises. So as you continue to try to progressively overload these main lifts, eventually you're going to run into a wall where you find that, okay, I'm benching 350 pounds and I really can't add anything to the bar no matter what I do. I can't keep progressing this main lift. Well, why is that happening? It's because you have a weak point in the lift. If you're benching, your weak point is probably your triceps, and it's most likely the medial head of the triceps. So we would want to then take a look at our training and think, how can I use an accessory movement to drive up my main lift if my main lift is stagnating? So maybe you pick the tricep press down. But what a lot of people do when they're trying to target a weakness in their lift is they'll go do an accessory movement, but they never progress it, or they never push themselves on it. Say you're working hard on bench, you're doing your 4 sets of 3 or 5 sets of 2 or whatever you're doing. You're working hard, pushing weight, but now your progress is stagnating. So then you go and you do an accessory movement, but all you're doing are sets of 10 at an easy weight. You can't expect that accessory movement is going to help drive up strength in your main lift if you're not pushing that accessory movement in the same way that you would push the main lift. You might do more reps, you might do sets of 6 or 8 instead of sets of 3 on an accessory movement, but you should still take the same approach of trying to increase the load you're lifting, increase the reps that you can do at a certain load, and go back and forth between those two approaches over time. So say you're doing your tricep press downs to increase your bench, and this week you can do 10 reps at 100 pounds. Well, maybe the next time you do it, you should try to get 6 or 8 reps at 110 to 120 pounds, and then maybe you push those up to 10 reps. Then once you've hit that, then you add more weight, try that for 6 to 8 reps, and you keep trying to push that accessory movement up over time. Similarly, say you're doing back extensions or single leg back extensions to work on your hamstrings, glutes, and low back strength. Well, if all you ever do is do those at a body weight load, after you've done that for a few sessions, that's no longer really going to be a very potent stimulus to get your body to adapt. So you'll want to add weight. Maybe you grab a 10-pound plate, a 25, 45, depending on how strong you are, and you work with that weight. Then over time you might add more load to it. But the point is, we want to take these accessory movements and progress them in the same way that we progress our main movements, so that way we're able to bring up our weaknesses, target the things that are holding us back, and continue to make progress in both our big lifts and our accessory movements. If you're weak off the ground in the deadlift, you probably need stronger quads. If you're weak at the top of a deadlift, you probably need stronger glutes. If you're struggling in the squat, maybe you need to work on your back strength or your quad strength. There's different things that can hold us back in these different movements, but the main point here is we need to progress our accessory movements just like we progress our main move. So just to recap, if you're able to pick the right exercises, you pick simple, stable exercises that you can use a high load with and be very forceful with. You progress your training loads over time in your main movements, and you push yourself in your accessory movements and progress those loads over time, then that's going to be a recipe for getting stronger. And if you really want to get stronger, you got to dedicate yourself to consistently training over time, avoiding large training gaps in your strength training, and keeping it in your program so that way you can keep getting stronger. And as you keep getting stronger, you can keep doing your work on the track or your sport work or whatever that is, and you can progressively increase your training load. You can keep pushing your body to get stronger, and if you do that over time consistently and you stay healthy, that's going to help you perform better in your sport.